Good morning. Here we are at the beginning of topic 11. I am feeling pretty good. We got through topic 10. I know some of you have even already done your homework, and I'm really pleased about that. We're going to dive in here to perfect competition, and in this topic and the next two topics, our focus is going to be on how the type of market or the market structure affects outcomes in that market. Okay, so the first we're going to talk about, which we've actually already been talking about for really the majority of the course, the first type of market we're talking about is perfect competition. And although our assumption all along has been perfectly competitive markets, we haven't really defined what we mean by perfect competition. So that's the first thing we'll do here, is to talk about what perfect competition means. And then we're going to pull in those cost concepts from the last video and look at some cost curve graphs. All right. So we've been making a lot of assumptions throughout this class, and I haven't always made them explicit because otherwise we get bogged down in lots of mathematical assumptions. But here I'm going to outline kind of 4 key assumptions that we're making in order for this model of a firm to be accurate. The first really applies to everything that we do in this class. So we're always assuming from the very beginning, from the very first day, that every actor, firms or consumers, will take an action if and only if the benefit of that action is bigger than the cost, right? Do it if the benefit is bigger than the cost. Firms aim to maximize profits, right? They want to make money. And consumers aim to maximize utility or happiness, all right? So this is, again, this is something we've been assuming all along. I'm just writing it out for you here. The next 3 are specific to perfectly competitive markets, okay? Each actor, firms and consumers, is a very small part of a big market, okay? So we have a small part of a big market, right? So each firm is just one small supplier in a very big market. Each consumer is a small purchaser in a very big market. And then firms all are producing identical products. So consumers would not be able to distinguish between a product produced at one firm and a product produced at another firm. And then the last assumption that we're going to make here is that there are no barriers to entry or exit. That means that anyone who wants to sell in this market can, anyone who wants to buy in this market can, and exit same, right? If you don't want to buy in the market or you don't want to sell in the market, you don't have to, okay? There's no restrictions on who can enter or exit the market. So all of these assumptions will be important to us as we develop the model of firms in perfectly competitive markets. But before we get to that, I want to just give you some examples, because what matters at the end of the day is that you can take the information that we talk about here and look at actual markets in the real world and think, oh, this is kind of competitive, or this is more competitive, and this is less competitive. So I would expect firms to behave in this or that way in that situation, right? So in reality, we have this extreme of perfect competition and an extreme of monopoly, and most markets in the real world fall somewhere in between. So we don't have a lot of examples of perfect competition, but I'll give you a couple that are probably close, okay? So a lot of raw materials like lumber, maybe like gas, you might even think of gas stations. That's a little bit less competitive, but it's pretty competitive, right? They're all selling basically the same product. And then produce, So we've got apples and, you know, other kinds of goods like milk, right? So for example, an apple, I go to the grocery store, I buy an apple, I maybe know what country that apple was made in, right? What grown in, I guess. But I don't have any idea which farm grew the apple, right? So I can't distinguish between apples grown at one farm versus apples grown at another farm. So all the producers are making basically an identical product. All right, so got some examples here of markets that are probably pretty competitive or close to perfectly competitive. And then we want to think about how those firms are going to behave. And before I move on, it just occurred to me, I did mean to write gas stations here because many of you may know that OPEC has market power over the production of oil, right? So here I'm talking specifically about the sale of gas to consumers, not necessarily the production of oil as being perfectly competitive. And we'll actually return to talk about OPEC in a couple lectures, topic 13, I think. Okay. All right, so good. How do firms in perfectly competitive markets behave? Well, they're all selling identical products. So we call these firms price takers because they really have no control over the price in the market, right? Each firm is really small. Imagine you have hundreds of different farms growing apples, and each farm is selling these apples to the grocery stores, and they're all exactly the same, right? So if you were to go to the grocery store, you know the market price of apples is, say, $2 a pound. Well, if one of these farms tried to sell their apples to the grocery store for $5 a pound, there's no way the grocery store would buy it. It's exactly the same apples that they can get from someone else for $2 a pound. So these firms have no ability to raise their price above the market price. They simply observe the market price and then take that price as given. Okay, so we call them price takers. So that's what these graphs are describing here. These graphs are describing the market for a product and the situation of an individual firm. Okay, so the individual firm does not set the price. The market sets the price. Of course, you know, supply and demand determine the price in a market, right? So the market sets the price, okay, where supply equals demand. And then the firms, excuse me, they observe the price, okay, and they know, okay, here's the price of apples, $2 a pound, say. I can sell as many apples as I want at $2 a pound. Okay, how many apples should I sell? Well, they're going to take that price, and just like we talked about last time, they're going to produce as long as the price is greater than or equal to their cost of production, right? Their marginal cost. So that stops being true at this point, right? Okay, here's where, right, for all of these units, your price here, that's higher than your marginal cost curve, which in perfect competition is also the supply curve. Okay, so profit maximizing quantity here. And you'll notice that our demand curve for the individual firm in a perfectly competitive market is perfectly elastic. Remember, way back when we talked about elasticity, I gave you this as an example of a perfectly elastic demand curve. Here it is, okay? Because firms take the market price as given, they have no ability to raise their price. We say that demand for individual firms in a perfectly competitive market is perfectly elastic. All right, So notice here that because firms take the market price as given and they have no influence over the price in the market, that price is equal to marginal revenue. And remind you, marginal revenue is the revenue from each additional unit. Okay, so when I sell one more pound of apples, how much money do I get? In this situation, that's just equal to $2 a pound or whatever the market price of apples is. All right. Good. So let me see if I've covered everything here. The market sets the price. The firm takes the price as given and produces as long as the price is greater than or equal to marginal cost, right? And that's the same decision rule that we were using last time. Okay, this applies specifically to firms in competitive markets, and we will continue to use that here as we look at our graph problems.